On today's podcast, the veterans who've discovered the benefits of archaeology.
We're delving further into the remarkable discoveries at Cerne Abbas.
And Time Team News explores the return of the incredible Staffordshire Hoard to public display.
It is the Time Team podcast with Martyn Williams and Dr. Helen Geake. And if you're watching or listening to this podcast on the day it's published, then today is Armistice Day.
Yes, and you might have recognised some of the team who are part of Operation Nightingale there. That's a project which uses archaeology to help veterans and serving military personnel. And one of those is Paul Hemingway, who spent 25 years in the army and has been volunteering with Operation Nightingale for the past 12. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Helen. I'm Martyn. How are you doing?
Yep, doing very well. Thank you, Paul. Lovely to see you. Today, Armistice Day, is a very special day, and especially for people like you, people who have served in the military. What does it mean to you?
It means a lot to me, having grandparents who fought in the two wars. It's a day for remembering people who are not with us no more, on people who I served with, plus obviously people in the First and Second World War that gave their lives. It's a really, really important day. We should never let it go.
Tell us, Paul, a bit about your military career. What did you do? What was it like?
I knew from a very young age I always wanted to join the army, which I eventually did, obviously. And when I first joined, as like a rabbit in the headlights, it was all new to me, working with so many people at once. But the friendships you get, well, it's like a brotherhood. Eventually, it's you get a strong bond with all your friends, and it's fast and furious. Yeah, some days you're not doing next to nothing. Some days you're out in a bloody very dangerous environments doing dangerous things.
A 25-year career, which is something to be really, really proud of. But for the last 12 years, you've been involved with Operation Nightingale. Now, explain a little bit about how you got started with Operation Nightingale. What made you want to suddenly get involved with archaeology?
I met a guy in a pub where a few veterans drink, and he caught an explosion in Afghanistan. He's part of the local TA unit down here. And he said he's part of this thing called Operation Nightingale. And I says, well, what's that? Never heard of it before. And he says, well, why don't you come along? I says, well, what are you doing? He says, it's archaeology. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. But where are you going? He says, oh, we're digging on Salisbury Plain. I went along, and it's the best thing I ever did. Straight away, well, they welcomed me on board. I learned so much about archaeology from Wessex. The people from Wessex Archaeology was up there. The mental benefits is unreal. Even if you don't like archaeology, it's being around like-minded people, and on an evening having a few cans of beer around a campfire and just taking the mickey out of each other like you used to do in the forces, and also learning archaeology. But it works fantastically. It was an experiment, back in the day when it started, but it's been proven to work. It is fantastic, and you can't wait for the next dig. You're actually looking forward to it.
Paul, you talk about the mental health benefits. I mean, I was with you in Anglesey doing something that we can't talk about yet, very secretive, but you and I were together along with a number of other people who were taking part in Operation Nightingale, many of whom were talking quite openly with each other about the mental health problems that they had. Some had PTSD, others had other types of mental health issues, and they were talking about the benefits that doing archaeology can bring. What do you think it is about archaeology that does help people who are struggling with their mental health?
Helping me personally, it was learning something completely different, and because you get that involved in it, and it's a very interesting subject. It just takes your mind off everything in your past, and you can just. It's like when you take a country walk, and you just let all your troubles go behind you. But that's a similar thing. You just put your head in a hole and dig away, and you're learning about objects that you're pulling out of the ground. And next week, you think, oh, what was I worried about? And then you can bounce off people as well who's got similar problems.
The taking your mind off your troubles thing. I mean, Martyn, for you, the same thing might be playing a piano maybe, but you don't do that as part of a team. I think that's one of the most wonderful things about archaeology. It's a bit like a rugby team. There's a place for everybody with their particular skill, and you're all working to one end. So I think that's one of the things, don't you, Paul?
Yeah, definitely. The teamwork is unbelievable. And when I go on up Nightingale digs, all from different backgrounds or different units and that, and they all bring something to the table, and you just slot in straight away with them because you're all pulling in the same direction, sort of thing. So you all knit together straight away.
And of course, for us on Time Team, we only ever see you out of doors, don't we? So
Yes.
we always see you
Yeah.
in a place that's quite safe for you. An archaeological site is safe.
Yeah, well, it has been in the outdoors. Even my therapist says, when you're going on your next dig, and when I came back from Anglesey, I had a therapy session, and she said, "You've been on a dig, haven't you?" She knew because I was bouncing around, sort of thing. I'm feeling that better. I've even booked a flight to Norway for the 10th of December to see my girlfriend, and I would never get on a plane for the past couple of years. I won't even dare, go to an airport, never, or a lift.
That's fantastic. Well, it's great to hear that you're getting the professional help, but also that Operation Nightingale is giving you that outlet, giving you another way that you can talk about some of the things that you're going through around people who get it.
Yeah. There's so many people on digs. They'll can have a quiet word, and we'll just wander off somewhere and just sit down on a grass banking or something and have a 10-minute talk with somebody that's going through the same thing as yourself, that you can just open up to. Does more than therapy can do in months. It does it because you're unloading on each other, and you know that person understands it.
Well, Paul, it's so great to catch up with you, and so great to hear what Operation Nightingale has done for you and people like you as well. Thank you so much for coming on. Great to speak.
Great to see you both. Take care.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you, Paul.
Bye-bye now.
You too.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Paul. And Time Team is continuing to mark Armistice Day with a classic episode from 2008. It's called Blitzkrieg on Shooters Hill, investigating a Second World War defensive site in South London. That is available to Time Team members on Patreon.
On YouTube right now is our film all about the chalk giant of Cerne Abbas, or more specifically, the forgotten abbey that lies near its feet. Time Team's Matt Williams followed the story as archaeologists worked to unearth its secrets.
Well, the stars of that film, archaeologist Hugh Wilmot and medieval historian Helen Gittos, join us on the podcast now. Hello!
Hello, great to be with you.
Hi, both of you. It's really nice to see you as well. And Helen, Martyn has said you're a medieval historian, but I tend to think of you as equally well qualified in the world of archaeology. And Hugh, you've got a good historical side to you as well. So how did you divide up the project between you?
I was working at Cerne, I was thinking about Cerne, and I was talking with Hugh, and I said, you got to come. There's so much archaeology there, but little did I know.
It's been an absolute delight, and also Helen is a mean digger. She won't thank me for saying that, but she's been, leading from the front as well. So I think we're a great interdisciplinary team.
How forgotten was the Abbey? I mean, how much work did you have to do to find out where it was?
The Abbey wasn't entirely forgotten. We know about it historically, of course, and there's a bit of a clue in the name of Cerne Abbas that there's an abbey there. But the sort of precise location, certainly of the later medieval layout, wasn't really known, because although there's a couple of upstanding bits of architecture around the site, the vast majority of it was completely demolished after the dissolution. So we didn't really have a clue precisely where it was. And there was just one open area, Beaver Field, where we thought there was going to be a really good chance it could be. So that led us to doing some geophysical survey.
It's so exciting. And for people who haven't yet managed to watch the film, they definitely should go and do it right now. But if they haven't quite managed, Helen, I wonder if you could kind of sum up what the main findings of your research and investigation there actually were.
Well, I mean, as Hugh says, it's absolutely remarkable that we really didn't know where a huge medieval building had been. What Hugh has managed to discover through survey and then confirmed through excavation is a very precise now plan of exactly where the cloister was, a pretty clear idea of where the church was, and beginning to get some real sense of where some of the major features within the Abbey precinct were. And that's transformed our understanding of this place within a very few short years. Really exciting.
Yeah, and it really is, isn't it? I mean, how surprised were you by the quality of the answers that you got to the questions that you had going into this dig?
I think when Hugh first showed the initial survey that he did, it was a revelation. It really, well, you could see on the ground, and he was able to talk me through, look, this is what you're looking at very, very precisely. And of course, there are lots of questions, and there are lots of questions about the bits that have been most robbed that Hugh is got to wrestle with a lot. But nevertheless, I don't think I had any idea when I first started talking with Hugh that we were going to get such clear answers so rapidly.
But the stratigraphy does seem to have been quite a puzzle over the time you were there. I mean, it wasn't as simple as simply unpicking a stone building, was it?
No. I mean, again, when you say an abbey to somebody, they often may conjure in their mind sort of fountains or Revo or one of those, beautifully preserved monuments. Cerne isn't that. So when it's been robbed, they've really pulled out all the stone, not just the sort of the main sort of upstanding stuff, but also they've even grubbed out the foundations. So what you're left with is kind of like an inverted building. You have no walls, but you do have the stratigraphy between the walls. But it means it's often quite disconnected. It's been disturbed where the walls have been taken out. So it's kind of like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, but somebody's just left you sometimes with those boring blue bits of sky, which are quite hard to get together. It's even though the geophysics looks marvellous, the actual archaeology is really, really quite tricky and requires very detailed examination.
There were the two trenches, weren't they, that were really kind of capturing your imagination, especially the mystery trench, which obviously, because it's where you called it the mystery trench, it was getting really, really exciting. That was the most exciting one. Which one and which sort of bit of the investigation and the dig kind of captured your imagination the most?
Gosh, that's a bit like saying which is your favourite child. I think they were both very different. I mean, the trench that was over the church, we kind of knew it was over the west end of the church, so that's not a big surprise. We had more questions about what might be below the church, trying to find earlier phases than the sort of 13th century building that we knew was there. So that was a sort of kind of interesting key question. The so-called mystery trench, which I didn't coin that phrase, but that was one of the.
I know, but it's good though.
It was one of the supervisors trying to make it more exciting when it was a bit wet and soggy at the beginning. That was over a building range that we could see on the geophysics, but didn't necessarily have a function that we could identify straight away. So that trench was a very different kind of trench because it was more sort of, what's here? We know something's here, but we don't know what it is. So both the trenches were very sort of different in character.
If I can take the $64,000 question, though, it's what was, in the end, the relationship between the giant and the abbey? Because that's the thing that has got everybody thinking, isn't it? It's the last thing that you would expect to be connected to an abbey as an enormous and rather rude chalk hill figure.
Yeah, and there are some clues about that from the geophysics that was done on the Trendle. And, that's beginning to suggest some of the sort of relationships between the two sites. And one of the great things about having done some of that work is that we're beginning to understand the wider landscape context, that it isn't just about the abbey and it isn't just about the giant, but the giant was clearly part of a sort of group of monuments on the hill of some kind. And we're just beginning now to get some clues as to what they might be.
What do you think the work that Hugh and his colleagues and you, Helen, have been doing tells us about what life was like when that abbey would have been in use?
I think we have to keep in the forefront of our minds that this abbey was a really significant place. We don't think very much about monasticism in the West Country, partly because so many of those sites don't survive. He was talking about the grand places in Yorkshire where we think about late medieval abbeys. We don't have so much survival in the West Country. And so I think it hasn't been in the forefront of our minds as being a place where monasticism was very important. And Hugh's work, I think, is really beginning to help us reimagine the medieval landscape in the Southwest.
So what happens next? What's the next phase of research?
as you'll know, Helen, it's like any archaeological excavation. There's always a lot of umming and ahhing and teasing out of information in the post-excavation.
This question probably comes much too early.
Absolutely. So
but still, I want to push you.
Well, no, we've got a lot of post-excavation work to do. But, I mean, as that's ongoing, there are still questions we've got about the Abbey. We've only looked at, a tiny percentage of the area. We still even got more survey work to do. I mean, the monastic precinct is a very large area, so there are parts we want to look at there as well. So, I mean, I think there's going to be plenty more to keep us occupied for some time.
That area is extremely famous sort of for tourism reasons because, of course, of the chalk giant. It is a really enigmatic landscape. What did it sort of feel like to be doing archaeology and be discovering more about that landscape, getting your hands dirty and actually doing it in such an iconic place?
Well, it's suddenly probably, of all the excavations I've ever done, the one that's been the most high profile in terms of visibility, because you are right in the heart of a community. As you say, it's in that sort of landscape that gets a lot of visitors. And Cerne Abbas is a sort of chocolate box village. So it's kind of a really, really not surreal place to be working, but it's quite a nice experience compared to being stuck on the top of a mountain or in a sort of boggy marsh or somewhere. So, but it really also brings it home to you that the community there are so engaged and sort of interested in their history that it's not just an abstract archaeological project. It's something that really matters to people, both locals and visitors. So, the feedback we got doing that work was really, really tremendous.
I think it's a complete privilege to be able to work in that landscape and to get to understand it better, to learn to read it, literally just to know the footpaths better, to get a better sense of how things are connected. But as Hugh says, we were so lucky to be working with so many members of the local community, and it was very much a team effort, and they teach us so much, and the work that they have done with us has been in itself a privilege to be part of.
Well, it does sound like an absolutely brilliant project, and I'm going to really enjoy following it over the years. But for now, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right then, time for Time Team News, and I've got some news stories from the world of archaeology here, Helen, for your consideration. And I want to start off at Hadrian's Wall, where there's some really exciting news. Now, I thought that surely we have researched and investigated Hadrian's Wall until we're blue in the face, so I was very surprised to hear that they've kind of discovered a new bit of it. A once-in-a-generation find is how this is being described. Volunteers have been working at Drumborough, which is about 10 miles, 16 kilometres away from Carlisle, over a 3-year dig. And they've come across a new bit of wall. I mean, how unusual is it to find a new bit of Hadrian's Wall?
Well, yeah, I think fairly unusual, actually. And I think you're right. Everybody thinks, well, it's a World Heritage Site. It's one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. You might think that we know everything possible about it already. But in fact, we don't. And I think it's particularly that western side near Carlisle that we don't know so much about. Because it was originally built in turf, perhaps. Maybe it's because it's so much more out of the way, the areas around Newcastle and the roads that go up to Edinburgh, it's a much more built up, it's much more travelled through, it's attracted a lot of antiquarian interest, that eastern end. And we do know masses about it, and it's been reconstructed and worked on and conserved for generations. But that western bit is much less well known, and it's a bit of a poor relation in a way, and there's still loads to be found out about it. And this story is so great. I mean, the project has got so much community involvement. It's really kind of given that stretch of Hadrian's Wall back to the locals in a way. I think it's a great story.
Yeah, and they weren't expecting as well to find it, which is, I think, even more wonderful, isn't it? That they put spades in the ground thinking, we think there could be something here, but we're not sure. And then to discover a whole extra bit of Hadrian's Wall, I think that's really exciting. Although in my head, I must say, in my mind, it was Hadrian's Wall and they'd sort of done the extension, they'd built the bit off the lean-to off the side. It's not quite like that, but still really,
no, but
really
I think that's what people
stuff.
used to think. They thought, well, the western bit's a bit of the poor relation. And now this great project, which was done, more in hope than in expectation, has come up trumps.
Right, from that to Birmingham, actually, in the UK, where the world-famous Staffordshire Hoard is now back on display.
Yes, now the city's museum and art gallery has been undergoing a bit of a makeover, and they're now in a position to show off part of what is, in fact, the largest collection of Anglo-Saxon gold ever found. And here's Jenny Butterworth, who's an ex-Time Team archaeologist, now a heritage consultant. She's worked on the hoard for many, many years.
The Staffordshire Hoard was discovered by a metal detectorist in 2009, Terry Herbert, and he started finding pieces of gold. The finds liaison officer went out to see the collection of finds in the metal detectorist's house, and he knew that it was really something very unusual and special. The reason why the hoard is just so popular is because it is a mystery. We don't know for sure who buried it and why. I think what now the research and conservation is done, we can make some pretty good guesses. We know it was buried sort of in the latter part of the 7th century AD, maybe about 675. We know what it was. It was a collection of high-status weaponry. It's like the decoration of very high-status swords and other objects. We also know there are lots of things that are not in it. There are no objects that obviously belong to women. There are no domestic objects. It's all the finery that a very high-status warrior would wear. And so you start looking at what's happening in Mercia. This was the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Mercia when it was buried. It was a time of great turbulence following the death of the last great Anglo-Saxon king, Penda. And so then, you can start to imagine that maybe the burial of this exceptional quantity of treasure, and it is an exceptional event, is tied up with the great sort of turbulent times that followed the death of Penda.
As Jenny says, it's all such a mystery, all that war gear, including several gold crosses that make us think maybe it's to do with a conflict not just between kingdoms, but also between belief systems, if you like. So Penda is a pagan. He's not very popular with Bede, who's the Christian historian of the time. And so Bede doesn't tell us a lot about him. We don't know much about Penda. But if you're combining swords, so that's the weapons of those who fight with violence, and also crosses, so you could think of those as the weapons of people who fight with the power of God. I mean, it is so tempting to think that it's got to be connected with the last victories, if you like, of pagan Mercia.
Now, looking after the hoard is, as you can imagine, vitally important. Jane Thompson-Webb is Conservation Manager at Birmingham Museums Trust.
So when the objects were first found, they were principally covered in soil. Some of them were just brought up as great lumps of soil. So you couldn't even really tell that there was an object in them. So there had to be quite a lot of micro excavation with small tools. And the initial conservation project was just to remove enough soil so that the object was recognisable and we could see what it is, also know if it was gold or silver, so that could be part of the valuation process. After that point, we wanted to do a more thorough clean so that people could really appreciate the design elements in the objects and also the materials themselves. So because they're so small, that meant all the work was carried out by looking down microscopes, working with very tiny movements. So it was quite a repetitive process, but also something where the team had to concentrate enormously on what they were doing. But because it's very thin, fragile metal, and also gold is quite soft, which is why it was very commonly used in antiquity, because it was easy to shape, it's very easy to damage. So normally in conservation we would use scalpel blades, we would use mounted needles to remove soil, but we didn't want to use those materials to damage the hoard. So my only contribution really to the conservation of the hoard was to come up with the idea of using thorns, because I knew that in the 1920s, when you had wind-up gramophones, it was very easy to damage the shellac, and one of the best ways to avoid doing that was to use thorns from things like blackthorn, hawthorn, that kind of thing. And so we did use thorns for the conservation, And we had a number of people in the Friends organisation who would bring us prunings from things like pyracantha, and we would spend many hours with pliers breaking the thorns off to give a sufficient quantity to do that. So it was weird bits of innovation with then giving us very small tools to do conserving with.
That's really good because, we all use thorns now for gentle cleaning. I personally find berberis, dead berberis, is the best, but they don't last long. You have to, they wear out quite quickly, so you have to always be picking new ones.
Now, I did get the chance to have a little sneak peek at the exhibition before it opened a few weeks ago. And whilst I was there, I was shown around, and there's loads of display cabinets where you can get really, really close to some of these minute little finds. But one of the other things that they've got there is this great big helmet. And the story behind that is quite interesting. It is a replica, what is there. But the reason it's a replica is because in the hoard, they found lots of tiny little fragments of helmet, and they've kind of very cleverly somehow digitally combined all these things back together to give an idea of what this helmet would have looked like, and then they've made a replica.
Yes, and that replica is absolutely stunning, and it solves quite a lot of the problems that there were within the hoard. The lumps of soil that Jane was talking about, a lot of the time they were giving the metal detectorist signals, but he couldn't find the object within and realise that they must be very, very minute and delicate. And those were the foils that you find on well, they're very similar to the foils on the Sutton Hoo helmet, but, and this is the thing that really gets me, the Sutton Hoo helmet, the foils are made from tinned bronze. So that's a silvery colour, the tin, and they're designed to look like silver. But the ones from the Staffordshire Hoard actually are silver. So they're actually a cut above the Sutton Hoo helmet, the Sutton Hoo Mound 1 helmet. It's not often you get something that is even more extraordinary than an object from Sutton Hoo, and that's what the Staffordshire Hoard helmet foils are. They're combined with, there was just one cheek piece from a helmet in the Hoard, and that was made from gold, and that also seems absolutely just mind-blowing. How could you make a helmet from gold? It's far beyond anything we ever imagined, really.
And all just in a field near the M6 toll. And I think the irony there is that if you sold all of that treasure, all of the gold and the silver in that hoard, you might just be able to travel 3 junctions up it.
Well, personally, I've never been on the M6 toll, so I wouldn't know. But that's said with the fervour of someone who lives nearby.
You got to be made of money to go there, I'll tell you, my word. Okay, let me take you far, far, far from the M6 toll now. In fact, this is a place that really captures the imagination. In modern-day Mexico, you'll find the civilization, or you would have found the ancient civilization of the Maya people. The ancient city of Coba has for a very long time got archaeologists wondering, and there's lots and lots of unanswered questions that they have about this amazing city. But one of the key ones is who ran it. They didn't really know the identity of the person that presided over it. And they've discovered very recently, through the discovery of something called the Foundation Rock, which is a limestone monument that they found, they've managed to kind of decode a lot of the writings, the hieroglyphics on that. And they've discovered that it was run by a queen of that area called Ixchacxheen. And this is really quite exciting new developments in the world of the ancient Maya people.
Yes, and it's so remarkable to look at the pictures of the inscriptions and the decoration and of the enormous stone buildings and realise that that's all happening in the 6th century AD, the same time as the heyday of early Anglo-Saxon England. And it's so different, and makes you realise that the world was always much bigger then. You could have civilizations rising and falling that never had any contact with anyone outside their own continent. It's just so different, and yet gives us a lot of pointers to how civilizations rise and fall. And if you're trying to understand the late Roman Empire, which I spend quite a lot of my time thinking about, then the collapse of the classic Maya, that's one of those things that's always looked at when people are talking about why civilizations fall. And I think at the moment, with climate change and everything else that's happening, why civilizations fall is a particularly interesting topic.
Yeah, well, there we go. A few stories from the world of archaeology. If you want to know more about them, by the way, about those stories that we were discussing, I'll leave links to the news articles in the description.
I think it's time for questions now, isn't it?
Yeah, although I think it's going to have to be question, because we are fast running out of time. So I might have to condense this by just having one question. Thank you so much. If you've got in touch and you've asked a question, you can do that if you are a Time Team member. You go to patreon.com/timeteamofficial. And if you just go into the little chat section there, you can contribute a question that could appear in a future podcast. And next week, by the way, it's going to be all questions. So there's going to be plenty of them there, but we have time just for one. And it comes from Stephen, who says, do you ever find pets or other domestic animals buried with bodies?
Well, yes, the answer to that is yes, but not very often. And I think that this might be because it's actually quite rare, if you think about it, for a pet and their human to die at the same time. But there are some hints that in the Roman world, a pet might have been sacrificed when their owner died. And there are a few dogs buried together with humans from the Roman period. And in fact, this is going to be my recommendation of a book for this week. There is a fantastic book on dogs in the Roman world, there it is, by Kate Smith, and she goes into this in great detail, and it's a really useful book, that one. So what she says is that sometimes you also find not just a dog buried in its owner's grave, but you also find what seems to be a dog in its own grave in the middle of a human cemetery. Although that seems like the kind of thing that we might do, as so often with the Romans, this turns on its head a bit and begins to be a bit weirder and a bit more, peculiar. It wasn't just a simple case of burying a pet with its human. There's a definite link between the rather unpleasant tradition of mutilating a dead body in some way that the Romans went in for and adding a dog to the grave. So it's possible that this ritual mutilation of a dead body might have been done if the community was in some way frightened of that person who died. So they could be buried in a way that would keep them in the grave, a bit like putting a stake through a vampire's heart. And then maybe, she suggests, a dog could be added to the grave as a kind of extra guard. So it's a guard dog rather than a pet.
And what about I was about to ask about the cats, yeah.
Yes. Now, cats, you might think it's difficult to know what a cat was in the past, because cats still have that dual purpose in a way. They're lovely pets, but they're also really useful at keeping vermin down. And I think that must be how they were seen in the past, more as work animals than companion animals. And I don't know of any cats in graves. But one thing that I found out when I was doing the research for my PhD that I've never forgotten is that in one grave in the 7th century in Anglo-Saxon England, there was a bird. It was either a crow or a rook, a kind of large corvid. And I don't know if you've ever met anybody with a pet crow. I know somebody who had a pet jackdaw, and they are amazing animals, really tame, really clever birds. And there is one in the grave of a young man at Lechlade. He is buried in a rather odd way. He's also got a bell in his grave. Bells are very, very rare in the early Anglo-Saxon period. So why he has a bell and a crow or a rook, we don't know. But the crow is buried by his hip. And I don't know how we can explain that, except that he was lucky enough to have a pet crow, and it must have died at much the same time as he did. But without having a lot of analysis or a lot of examples like Kate Smith has done, we don't know what it means.
Interesting. Didn't think that was going to be as interesting as it was, and I bet Stephen didn't either. If you've got a question that you want to put to Helen, we're going to do a whole questions thing next week. It's patreon.com/timeteamofficial. If you're a Time Team member, you sign up there, become a Time Team member, and you can ask your question.
And that is all we've got time for on this edition of the Time Team podcast. We release episodes every Tuesday, so if you aren't already, make sure that you hit follow wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode.
Yeah, we've got some very exciting episodes actually to bring you in the run-up to Christmas, including exciting stuff, the return of our Christmas quiz. You don't want to forget that. Next week, then, as I said, all about the questions. We will speak to you next time on the next edition of the Time Team podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. To get more from Time Team, become a member. Head to patreon.com/TimeTeamOfficial for extended interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more.